Hi, and welcome to Mother's Quest, a podcast for moms like me ready to live our own truly epic life. I'm Julie Neal, a life and leadership coach, community builder, writer, and mom to two high-energy boys who challenge me to grow into my best self. I'll be right there. Where was I? Hello, and welcome to a special episode of the Mother's Quest podcast. Thank you for showing up to this important conversation about two mothers and their quest for peace and reconciliation in Palestine and Israel. Thank you for choosing to press play. If ever there was a year demanding us to show up, this has been one. From COVID to floods and fires and refugee crises, our consciousness has had a lot to hold. It can be all too easy to shut down, to throw up our hands and to say, what can I do? That question, what can I do, is one I asked myself during the crisis that unfolded in Palestine and Israel in May of 2021. For days, watching the horrifying headlines, I felt powerless. Then several truths came to me and an intention to find a path to action, which I shared in a Facebook post, like sending a wish to the universe. The very next day, the guides I was looking for appeared. In a conversation with my mother, I learned about the Parent Circle, an incredible organization of Palestinians and Israelis who've lost children or family members in the conflict, and instead of turning to revenge, come together to work toward peace and reconciliation. Soon after, I found myself recording a conversation with Layla Al-Sheikh, who also goes by Layla, a Palestinian mother originally born in Jordan who lost her son, Hosai, at the age of 6 months old. And Robbie Damelin, an Israeli mother originally from South Africa, who lost her adult son, David, while he was serving in the army. Although today's topic is especially heavy, one of loss and tremendous grief, Layla and Robbie share their narratives with us for a specific purpose, to help us understand their experience and to support their efforts in bringing Palestinian and Israeli mothers in particular together to work toward change. Inspired by all they shared with me, the week after we recorded, I began to raise money toward a fund to help them bring together bereaved Palestinian and Israeli mothers of the Parent Circle. Along the way, I've been moved by so many mothers who have already contributed. Mothers like Jenna Schwartz, who dedicates this episode with a beautiful poem she shares at the end of this conversation. Jenna was the first to donate, and her powerful words are an invitation to you to say yes to this cause. To date, we have raised $5,000, half of the $10,000 goal I set, and we have more to go. Though the height of the crisis in May has receded from the headlines, violence continues in many forms, and the path for peace and reconciliation is needed more than ever. I ask you to listen with an open heart, to follow the links in the show notes to learn more, to contribute in any amount meaningful to you, and to amplify the voices of Layla, Robbie, and others like them, mothers closest to this conflict. They are a key to any path forward. I'm Julie Neal, and this is Mother's Quest. Robbie and Layla, welcome to the Mother's Quest podcast. I am so honored to have you here, and I'm hoping that you both sharing your stories, that you will not only inform and move me, but everybody who's listening here today.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you. Before we delve into my questions, I wanted to hear from both of you about any advice you have for me or others like me that want to hold space for courageous and sensitive conversation about such an emotional topic, or want to talk with mothers who have lost children. Lessons I've learned in doing anti-racism work is letting go of any idea that I'll be perfect and just trust that I may make mistakes in what I say or how I ask something. But is there any other words of advice you have for us?
I think the most important thing is to sit and listen without doing anything, because to give the mother or anyone who lost her beloved ones space to talk freely and honestly from the heart, this is the most important thing. And this is one of the things that really make me take the first step for transformation and take the first step to choose to be a peace activist. So I think this is the most important thing.
To truly deeply listen.
Yes.
But I also think there's something also very, very important, and that is not to give advice. It's terribly easy to tell people what you think they should be doing. And I remember when David, my son, was killed, I remember people coming and telling me what I should be doing and how, whatever's going to happen to me. Instead of just being there, you don't have to give anybody any advice. All you need to do is be there and just keep quiet and support in that way with that kind of empathy. And so I think all mothers are very much the same everywhere. And now there is a huge collection of people all over the world who have lost an immediate family member. And so the things that we are saying don't have to be applicable only to people who lose their children in a conflict. It's terribly important for the whole world to recognize that there's going to be this terrible trauma when Corona's over. And so whatever we can do to perhaps inspire people to understand that by example, we have taken our grief and we have harnessed it to make a change in society. And everybody has something that is important to them. And so those who have lost, if they would take that terrible grief and put it into something with change, that might turn their whole life around and will get them out of bed in the morning.
That's so powerful. So I'm moving forward with this conversation, then holding the value of empathy to really create space and truly listen and not to move into giving any advice. I'd like to ask each of you to tell me how you came to be connected to Palestine and Israel and what has been the impact to you of living there. Who would like to start?
Maybe I will start. In fact, I was born in Jordan. My parents originally from Bethlehem, but my father went to work. He left to Jordan with my mother, and after the war, 1967, he couldn't came back here because the Israeli government take a decision that they didn't allow anyone to come back. So I was born and raised in Jordan, and it was for me like a dream come true to come back and live in Bethlehem. As any Palestinian, this is a big dream to come back and live here again. So it was the most thing that I was dream of. And when I met my husband in Jordan, it was something like I was think that was kind of blessed from God that He gave it to me.
You were not born in Palestine, but you had this incredible opportunity to return, and it felt like an incredible gift at the time. Yes. And Robbie, what about you?
Well, I was born in South Africa. I came to Israel in 1967 with the Six-Day War, thinking I was going to save Israel, and landed up working in a chicken house. And that's really where I really never came here to live. I came here as a volunteer thinking I would stay for 6 months. And I knew I had to leave South Africa anyway because of a lot of the anti-apartheid acts. But I didn't think I would live in Israel. I really thought I would go to live in London or perhaps in the States.
And what caused you to stay?
I really don't know. It's in many ways a kind of love-hate relationship. And then I got married and had 2 kids and just stayed, and there are many wonderful things about Israel, but I really didn't understand when I first came here. Soon after the Six-Day War, I remember I was on the kibbutz and I told the people who were sort of our adoptive parents, I think this is a wonderful opportunity to give back all the territories that have been occupied by the Six-Day War because that would be a wonderful way to peace. But of course, I didn't realize, this is again the advice giver. I didn't know what it was like to live in Israel and to dig trenches for mass graves, because that was the way that they thought before the Six-Day War. I mean, all these countries who declared war virtually on Israel. And so here I was. It might have been a very good idea, and I wish that would have happened. It would have saved a lot of lives, including the one of my own son.
What happened next in both of your lives was something that would put every parent's heart to the test. Lila, tell us what happened with your son.
So when I came here, and after 1 year, we have our first child. She is a girl. We named her Yara. Now she's 21 and she's married. And after this year, the second uprising was start, and the Israeli government take a decision that they didn't want to give us our Palestinian ID. So that meant that I can't go freely from place to place. Most of the time I should stay at home, but I wasn't scared too much because I have my husband, my daughter to take care of her. And I was really so happy to have her. And I became happier when I have my second child. He was a boy. We named him Qusay. And both of them are so beautiful, and they were very intelligent children. And I was so happy to have both of them. But our happiness was ended the 11th of April, 2002, 4 o'clock in the morning, when my son was woke up, and he was in very critical condition because the day before the Israeli soldiers came to our village and threw tear gas, and he smelled some of it. And at the time, the treatment in our village wasn't good enough to take care of his condition.
I can only imagine how horrifying that must have been. So, what did you do then?
We tried to take him to a hospital inside Bethlehem, but there were an Israeli soldiers stop us, and they said to us, "You can't enter because it's a military area." And the other option was to take him to Hebron, the next city to Bethlehem. And they again said the main road is closed, so we should take him through rough, long road between villages. So when we went there, we find another checkpoint. They stop us more than 4 hours. They tried to check the car. They tried to check the ID of my husband, my father-in-law. And my father-in-law, he talked to them and he said to them that hospital as soon as possible because he was very sick. They didn't listen to us. Then I was think that I should take risk and talk to them. The risk is if they find that I didn't have my Palestinian ID, they maybe send me back to Jordan again and I will never see my children again, or they will send me to jail. But the only thing that I was scared about that moment, my son, and what should I do for him? And when I talked to them, they start to laugh and ask me to stay in the car. After 4 hours, they let us go. And when we reached the hospital, they said to us, the doctors, they said that his condition is so bad. And if he will stay alive after 48 hours, he will be handicapped. So as a mother, you could imagine how I'm feeling that moment. And I can't describe my feelings that moment. Few minutes later, they take him to the intensive unit care. And then 2 o'clock in the evening, the doctor asked us to leave because he said, if you will stay here, the soldiers will come and they will kick everyone out who's like you waiting for someone inside the intensive unit care, and you should leave. So after we left in the evening, immediately when I went to the house, I called the doctor and he started to explain his condition. Then my husband came. I asked him to talk to him because I didn't understand. But in fact, I was understand, but I didn't want to believe what he's talking about. So I said to my husband, please put the speaker on. Let me hear what he's talking about. Then I started to shout at the doctor. I said to him, what do you mean by this? And he said, I'm really sorry, your son died. That moment, I felt really his word was like a bullet comes to my heart, smash it down for many pieces. A few minutes later, the house was full of people, relatives, friends. but I wasn't care about any one of them. The only thing that I was thinking about and care about is my son. So I started to convince myself that this is dream. And when I return back home, I slept in the car and I will wake up again and bring him back and he will be in a good health. But after a few minutes, I realized that was unfortunately the truth. So next day in the morning, my father-in-law, he went to the hospital to bring him back to say goodbye for him. Until the moment that they put him between my arms, I was still think that he is alive and they lied to me for some reason. Sometimes we try to convince ourselves about something because we didn't want really to believe. So when I take the blanket off, I was shocked when I saw his body was blue. And when I tried to kiss him, he was looked like frozen rock. So I started to cry and hug him so tight. Maybe I was thinking that some kind of miracle will happen and bring him back to life. But the only thing that's happened that they take him away from me. From that moment, our life become upside down. And the most thing that really hurted me so much that day in the evening, my daughter, she was 2 years, I think, when she came and she tried to call. She picked up the phone and she tried to dial some number. And when I asked her, "What are you doing?" And she said, "I want to call my brother because sorry, I missed him so much. Where is he?" And I started crying because I couldn't tell her. I didn't know how to deal with this situation with her. How could I tell her what happened? And that was one of the hardest thing happened.
There cannot be a mother who can listen to your story and not feel as I do right now. My heart is beating fast. I feel nauseous, tears in my eyes. What you described happened to you is every mother's worst nightmare. I'm so sorry for your loss. Robbie, tell me about David and what happened to him.
Well, I had two sons, David and Iran. Iran is the eldest. And I brought them up in a very, very liberal, open home without or trying to teach them what it is not to be privileged and what it is to behave and be human. And then, of course, like every other Israeli kid, 18 comes along and you have to go to the army. There was a year and a month difference between David and Iran. And I remember standing at the bus stop and looking at Iran going off in the bus and thinking to myself, how could this possibly have happened? How can it be that I have a child who's going to be carrying a gun? And this is the reality of living here. And then a year after that, David had to go to the army, and the same thing happened again. They finished their service in the army, and I didn't really know exactly how bad it was for them, but I only understood once we had lunch, and they were very tall, like 6'4". And here were these two huge guys sitting around the table telling me stories of what happened in the army, and the tears were just pouring down their faces. And then when they finished the army, Iran went to India and David to South America. It's very often the case with soldiers. They want to run away from themselves and from what they'd been through in the army. David came back and Iran, and David decided to study psychology and philosophy at Tel Aviv University. And he was doing his master's in the philosophy of education. And he was then called up to go and serve in the occupied territories.
And how was he feeling about going to the occupied territories?
He really didn't want to do that because he had signed the letter of the officers who didn't want to serve in the occupied territories. And he came to see me and he said, what am I going to do if I don't go? What happens to my students? He was teaching philosophy to kids that were going to be inducted into the army. Is that the right example? And if I don't go, what happens to my soldiers? Because he was the officer. And if I do go, I will treat people with dignity, and so will all my soldiers. So you see, we don't always know who the person is behind the gun. And one should be very, very careful about how we see people and what labels we decide to give them. In any event, when the army came to tell me that David had been killed by a Palestinian sniper, it seems that one of the first things I said is, you may not kill anybody in the name of my child. And I think that comes from my South African background with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I knew almost immediately that I didn't want to continue my life as it was. I wanted to do something to prevent other mothers, both Palestinian and Israeli, from experiencing this incredible pain. It's like somebody comes and opens your heart and just tears part of your heart out, and you can't escape it. I thought I could run away, so I went to India, and yeah, you name it. But of course, it goes with you. You never. And then you learn to live with this pain next to you.
What an unbearable pain, Robbie. A pain that could so easily have turned to rage and retaliation. But I know both of you found another way through the parent circle. I'd love to hear about that journey for the both of you. Lila, why don't you start?
Most of the people, when they have this kind of situation, the first thing that they think about is take revenge. But I wasn't thinking about this. Yeah, I was filled with hatred and anger, but I wasn't think of revenge because my father taught us that the person who seeks for revenge, he's the weak one. But at the same time, I couldn't forgive them at that time. And I was taking a decision that I didn't want to talk to any Israeli person because for me, they were responsible about his death. Until I met one of my friends and he started talking to me about the burn circle. In the beginning, I wasn't really convinced about what he's talking about until one day he said to me, look, oh yeah, I told him, I don't want to hear you talk about this. You know what happened to me and to my son. And then he said to me, because I know you, I told you this. And I want to ask you a question. Why until now you didn't tell your other children about what happened to their brother? I told him because I didn't want to lose any one of them. I lost one of them, and this is much more than enough for me. I didn't want them to be part of this cycle of violence. And he said, because of that, I talked to you because I want to help you to not just protect and save your children, maybe other families. So he invited me once to a conference in Bethlehem for the Better Circle Forum. And when I went there in the beginning, they were just Palestinian. And then after a few minutes, the Israelis started to came and enter that room. And I was shocked when I saw them. They were hug each other, family members. And I really want to sit and to see and listen what the things that make them so close to each other like that. This is something amazing. I wasn't see it before. So when they start to talk about their personal stories, I was really amazed because it was the first time I looked at them as a human like me. Because I always saw them as soldiers, but it was the first time I saw them as a human like me. We share the same pain, we share the same tears. Yeah, we have many different things, but the pain is the pain, and the losing is the same losing. So from that moment, I decided to participate in one of the projects called Barrel Narrative Project. It's to bring 15 Palestinian and 50 Israelis face to face to each other. And for most of them, it is the first time to give them a chance to speak and talk about everything they want to talk about. So the first activity was about to tell something happened during the conflict affecting your life. So I started to talk about what happened to my son. And it was the first time I speak about his story. And, even after 16 years, and because it was the first time, it's like to open the wound again and bring the whole memories back. So it was so hard for me. I started to cry. I couldn't complete the story. And there were an Israeli woman. She came and sat in front of me and she started to apologize. And I was look to her and ask myself what she is apologized for. And she said, I know the people that they hurt you and they hurt your child. They are from my own people. And I'm really so sorry for that. I'm a mother too, and I have a daughter, and I could understand your pain. I could understand your anger. I even could understand the word that you couldn't say. And she came and hugged me and she started to cry. There was really amazing thing. She didn't know that by her simple words that she touched my heart really so deeply. And her word was like light from deep and dark place, open my heart and open my mind. Because sometimes, most of the time, when you feel of hatred and anger, that cover your eyes and your heart and your mind to think clearly. And this is what really helped me to start my journey in peace and reconciliation. Thank you so much.
And you, Robbie, how were you impacted by the parent circle?
I went to a weekend of Palestinian and Israeli bereaved families in East Jerusalem with the man who created the organization, the Parent Circle. And I looked into the eyes of the Palestinian mothers, and I realized that we share the same pain, and that, in fact, if we could stand on the stage as the sort of stage that Lila and I are standing on and speak in the same voice for reconciliation and nonviolence, then surely that would be an extraordinary example for anybody. Just a man in the street, we are the least likely people to make this statement. I recognized that pain so quickly, and I knew that this was going to change my whole life, and this is what I would be doing. And so I started to travel all over the world, and I was very pleased with myself and thought I was terribly important because I spoke in Congress and in the House of Lords and in various parliaments all over America and in all over Europe, and hip hop concerts, and you name it. And one night I came home and I was sitting next to my computer, and there was a knock on the door. And I went to the door, and there were 3 soldiers standing there. And when there are 3 soldiers, it can only mean one thing. So I slammed the door in their face. I just could not bear even the vague idea that I would lose another child. They continued to knock until eventually I opened the door, and they said, "We came to tell you that we caught the man that killed David." That's when it became difficult. You see, you can go around the world talking about peace and love and read bad poetry and rainbows, but do you actually mean it? It's a very long story, and I'll kind of cut it short, but after 3 months of not sleeping, I wrote a letter to the parents of Thaya, the man who killed David, and 2 Palestinians from our group delivered it. You can imagine how shocked they were to get that letter. I told them all about the Parents Circle, that we are 600 families who've all lost an immediate family member, but we understand and recognize that for any lasting peace agreement, we would have to have a framework for a reconciliation process to be an integral part of any political future peace agreement. And that if we didn't have that, at best we could have just a ceasefire until the next time. I told them all about David and who he was, and I told them that we need to meet because we owed that to our children and grandchildren. So you can imagine how shocked they were. And then, of course, I'm not the most patient character in the Middle East, so I immediately think I will get a letter from Thaya within the next few days. And of course, there's no such thing as instant reconciliation. It took 3 years, and I got a letter from him in which he said that I'm crazy and that I should stay away from his family and that he killed 10 people to free Palestine. But the fact is, I knew that when he was a small child, he saw his uncle violently killed in front of him by the Israeli army. And he lost 2 further uncles in the Second Intifada. And so I think he went on a path of revenge. And actually, that was an incredible moment for me because I suddenly recognized that I gave up being a victim and that my life was absolutely not contingent on what Thaya would do. I still wanted to meet him, but it didn't mean that my life would be contingent on that. And so I went to South Africa with 2 filmmakers, and we made a film about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where we met perpetrators and victims. And one of the mothers that I met, I think had a huge influence on me. She'd gone to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and she said to the people who killed her daughter, I forgive you. And I wanted to know what she meant by that. And so part of the movie was we went to see her, and she said, I said to her, what do you mean when you say you forgive? And it's a question that everybody should actually ask themselves, because everybody thinks about forgiving differently. And she said, forgiving for me is giving up your just right to revenge. And then I met the man who actually sent the people to kill her daughter. And he said, by her forgiving me, she released me from the prison of my inhumanity. That's the most extraordinary statement. And so I came back to Israel and I decided to meet Thaya. And the Minister of Justice gave me permission, but then we had various elections, and it would appear that Israel is destined to have many, many elections. The new Minister of Justice had no intention of allowing me to go into the jail. But that's where the story is. But I'm just one of a group of 600 families. Every one of them could sit here and tell you a story that would change even the hardest of hearts, because it comes from a place of truth and it's a narrative. And even if you don't agree with anything that I'm saying, I would find it very difficult to believe that you wouldn't feel that it wouldn't touch your heart in some way, and that you wouldn't have some form of emotional breakthrough. And if I can be of any support to any mother anywhere, it is terribly important for her to go and tell her story to whoever will listen, and to learn how to focus so that she can tell her story in a way that people will be willing to listen.
Robbie, thank you for telling me your story. I appreciate all the complexity of it and the fact that your story is still being written, that you are still waiting for a possible day when you might meet the person who killed David. And yet it doesn't stop you from working towards reconciliation and continuing to open your heart.
Julie, I just wanted to say that one Palestinian killed David, not the whole Palestinian nation. And besides, he didn't kill David because he was David. If he met David, I promise you he could never have killed him. He killed his uniform.
What I so appreciate about what you just said and everything that I've experienced from the parent circle so far is the way in which you all both acknowledge the pain and the hurt and the violence that is real, and at the same time peel away the layers of the roles and the situation and the division and get to the heart of the fact that you are all human beings and mothers who love their children. I want to hear a little bit more about the way in which you think that revealing your stories and connecting at a human level through the parent circle can move you towards reconciliation and peace, because it can still feel so hopeless. How do you still find hope, and what is the pathway you see ahead of you?
For me, when I look to myself now, like when this war was ended, or when it was start these days before 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I was really confused because it's the first time the war happened, a peace activist, and I was confused first 2 days and didn't know what to do. Then when I look to myself and remember what happened to me and who I am today, I still encourage myself and said, we should still have that hope, because when I look to myself now and before 4 years, I became really a different person in many, many levels, mentally healthy, with the way that I act with the people around me, my family, my friends, and even with the Israelis people where I looked to them as my enemy for many, many years. And now I have many friends of them, and some of them become much closer to me than my own family members. So I even look to the person who created this amazing organization as Hack Frankenthal. He created when Hamas was kidnapped his son and killed him after 3 days. But he didn't take a decision of revenge, but he took a great and amazing decision to start to have this organization and to start to talk to all the people that he could about peace and reconciliation. And when I look to his story, how he started this by his own. And now, as Robbie mentioned, we become much more than 600 families who losing their beloved ones and become members. And we have more than 2,000 or more even people who didn't lose their beloved ones, but they participate in the project. So I think we should still have that hope that we are growing. And as we said, the road of 1 mile starts with one step. And we should look to that. And even we should look to the other countries like Germany, how many years they were have that conflict, and even the Irish and the people in London and even Africa. All this conflict take years, but at the end of the time, they find solution. They find a real peace and reconciliation between them.
I think the fact that you have been through what you've been through and you can feel that sense of hope builds hope in me, and I imagine anyone listening. Robbie, how do you see the path forward?
Oh, look, I mean, we certainly can't give up hope. If there's no hope, there'll never be peace, because it is the important equation in creating a future that will be safe. And so when you look at the kids who were involved in all of the uprising now, in the anger during Ramadan of the Palestinian kids, if you look at the Palestinian Israeli citizens and their anger and the secular children, if you look at all of this stuff, all these kids are something like between 16 and 22 maybe. So you think to yourself, what is it that we're going to have to be doing? Because they are a product of what we've been doing. Where is the education? How are we going to change this? Look at the poor little kids in Gaza. 67 children died. Now, the ones that are left, how are they going to be brought up? How much hatred will they have for their neighbor, and their neighbor who also has gone through a war and rockets and will never know, or has not known up to now, the children of Gaza? What are they going to be like when they grow up? And so this is the duty that we have. Everybody should understand this, and that's the hope. And the fact is that everything we do on the ground, it's not just, we don't work with only bereaved people. 90% of our work is with the general public, is to get them to understand that we are the consequence of this madness, and that our stories first should make that breakthrough, but it also should make them active to try to change things around them. I just cannot believe that we've gone through this madness, this war, which is exactly a mirror image of 2014, except now the weapons are a little bit more sophisticated. So what will happen in another 5 years? We'll have another war, and we'll kill another 67 children, and the children in Sderot and Ashkelon and Ashdod will be traumatized in wet beds at the age of 12. I keep bringing this up because I keep thinking about kids and our role as mothers, and where can we contribute to change. And it's very important, and therefore in the Parent Circle is a very strong women's group who are doing whatever they can to try and be leaders. It's very important. The work that we do in schools is incredible. The work that we do on this narrative project that Lila was telling you about, which creates all these alumni who go into their villages. So all of this work is terribly important, and I cannot not have hope. Otherwise, why would I get up in the morning? For what? You would have told me when I came to live here in 1967 that blacks and whites would sit together in South Africa and want to kill each other. I would have said you were mad. Even after all the years that I'd spent in my anti-apartheid movement, there was so much anger. So I think a kind of miracle But miracles are not something that change things overnight. It's a process. You can't have instant reconciliation. It takes time. But we have to act with empathy and we have to listen because the polarization isn't only in Israel and Palestine. Just look at your own country, Julie. Look at the polarization that's happening and how they could actually benefit from taking a lot of the projects that we do and importing them into your country. Because we travel a lot in the States when there's no corona, maybe 3-4 times a year, and give lectures and meet people who can make change in Congress. All of this work is not only local, it has an international flavor.
Yeah, I think one of the things that struck me, which caused me to seek out your work, is this sense that we are all connected in ways that didn't seem as real before, and that what's happening in Israel and Palestine matters to what's happening here, and what's happening in the United States impacts what happens in your country.
I think a lot of what is happening and that upsets me terribly is this pro-Israel, pro-Palestine attitude. Because what happens with that, when you're pro something, you import our conflict into your country and create hatred between Jews and Muslims. You can see it in the streets now. How sad is that? Half of these people who are pro-Palestine or pro-Israel couldn't find us on a map. So I say, please be involved. Please tell our stories because this is terribly dangerous. And that's why on so many levels, what's happening in universities all over the world are these kids who are taking the position. Be a part of the solution. You're not supporting us by supporting only Israel or only Palestine. Be a supporter of a reconciliation process. Be a supporter of getting out of the occupied territories. Because let me tell you something, that the occupied territories, by the way that we are behaving, it is killing the moral fiber of Israel as well. There's so many complex things in this conflict, Julie. It's not a question of that become a Palestinian. I love Israel. It's my country. But I want it to have and be a safe place and a moral place.
Thank you, Robbie. I think building on what you just said, I'd like to hear a little bit more about how do you think that we can invest in mothers like you? What sustains you to stay in this work? And how might we be a part of supporting you?
So we have a plan, and one of it is to get to know each other much better. One of the benefits of Zoom, by the way, is that Palestinians can come into our houses without having to ask the powers that be for permits to travel. And so we can open up on Zoom. I can open up my home to Lila and to all the hundreds of women that belong to our organization so that they can get to know me better. And one of the things, part of that is using simultaneous translation and looking for ways to make us know each other better, to know the culture, to respect the culture. That's one thing. And I have a kind of a dream. In my dream is to create a library of testimonials of transformation, because I think that's the most incredible present that we can give to the world is these wonderful, wonderful people who have gone through a transformation from hatred into some form of understanding that they must now work towards nonviolence and reconciliation. And if we have this library, which means something like short clips on each person, can you imagine if we had all the women in the parents' circle would be able, each one, to tell her story on camera that would be saved for posterity?
Thank you, Robbie.
Lila, I'd love to hear from you as well on this question. What sustains you in this work, and how could other mothers support you?
One of the most important things that when we try to enter this organization, first of all, to save our other children, because we go through that pain and we didn't want to do it again. not for us and not even for other mothers or other families. We want to protect everyone as could. So one of the amazing things that we're doing now inside the women's group that we have from 1 year, they start to teach us how to be leaders in our community and with our partners, the Israeli partners. And now we try to think to do projects. So they even educated us to start to have our own projects, first of all, and then to have project inside the forum and to do other projects with other organizations. So it's just women's group. So this is something very important for us to encourage us always and to build much more confidence for the women because the situation here is not easy, especially in Palestine. The women, they didn't have always the chance to educate it or to even talk about her pain or even to do whatever she wants to do. So most of the women, they find their opportunity inside the forum to do whatever they want. So maybe this is one of the things that you could help us with.
Well, I think in short, what Lila is saying is if mothers want to support, by the way, the best thing would be to our women's group. And if we could support those mothers too, we would be delighted to meet them on Zoom, to give them a dialogue meeting, to do work together. You know, I met some of the Black mothers in Atlanta, and there's no need to build any bridges between us. All mothers are the same, regardless of where they come from, what color they are, or what religion. There's no need for a bridge. We find each other immediately. We are sisters in pain, sisters in understanding the need to protect our children.
Yes. Robbie, when you and I had our introductory conversation, we were talking about Sabrina Fulton and her circle of mothers and the so many Black mothers in the United States who've lost children to police violence and gun violence. And there are so many ways in which what Sabrina has created in Circle of Mothers mirrors what you're doing in terms of creating space for them to tell one another their stories and to step into leadership. I'm also thinking of Colette Flanagan of Mothers Against Police Brutality, who says an insult to one mother is an insult to all mothers.
Yes.
And I truly believe that we are all connected in our humanity and our love for our children. And I would love to be part in some way of galvanizing some more mothers in the United States to support your work. And I'd like to move this into some specific invitations then for me and anybody listening.
I've seen so many women who've come who've never been educated, who never had the opportunities. Palestinian mothers who come first to the parent circle, they've never had an opportunity to tell their stories. And so what happens is in the beginning, they tell the story and you get all the details of how the person was killed, how much blood there was, how far the gun was, how old the person was. But eventually, if they get an opportunity to continue to tell their story, what happens is they begin to talk about the person that died. And that's a really important step in healing. And so there's so many things that we have in common with mothers everywhere. Whoever I've met, I spent a lot of time with Lucia McBath, and we met mothers of officers, police officers, and we spoke together in Atlanta at the Martin Luther King Museum. And it was as if we'd known each other for 20 years. There was no need for any of this bridge building. And therefore, I think we could easily fit into any kind of group that wants to talk. And we'd be delighted to do that. You know, we speak a lot in synagogues, in churches, in mosques. It's very funny because my father tried to make me go to synagogue all his life, and I would never go. And now I'm in churches, synagogues, you name it, everywhere. But it's important to get this message, not only for the parent circle, it's for the solace of many mothers who've never had this opportunity. And now that you have this corona, what will be left afterwards will be a lot of very broken hearts. And by the way, if I can say something to mothers who've lost, they become the central figure, but don't forget about the brothers and sisters, because they also are part of this bereavement and they deserve to be recognized as well.
So one specific way that we can support is to contribute.
Yeah, as me and Robbie said before, that this project is so important for all the women because, as I said before, that most of them, they didn't have opportunity to learn or even sometimes to tell even her story or to talk about her bereavement or to talk about a lot of things. So we try to do our best to educate them, to help them, and to teach them how to do many things and to support each other, even when we just sit and talk to each other and speak about our families or even the people that we lost. Because sometimes we as Palestinian women didn't have a chance even to express about our feelings. Like me, after my son was died, I stayed for 16 years, didn't say a word for any person about his death. And he didn't know how that affect me healthy, mentally, emotionally. And when I have a chance to talk, that was so hard, but at the same time, it's kind of healing when you start to talk to other people who suffer like you and they could understand you, even if you just sit and listen. And even if you didn't or couldn't say some words, they could understand your pain. So this is the most important thing that we do as project, like dialogue meetings, when we went to people everywhere and start to talk to them about reconciliation and peace and our even personal stories. When we have that project, the Pearl Narrative Project, it's bring both sides together and let them sit down, listen to each other, and learn a lot about each other. Like we bring two professors who talk about the history for the both sides. We talk about the villages, the Palestinian villages who were exiled before 1948, and we went to Yad Vashem Museum to know much more about the Holocaust because as Palestinians, some people didn't really believe that it's real because they think that the Israeli government or the Israeli people fake that because they want to justify the things that they do. So this is kind of project is so important to us as Palestinians.
So number one, we can raise funds to help make this incredible work that you do possible. Then the second thing we could do is invite members of the parent circle to come into our own communities and share. There's also just so many learning opportunities that the parent circle puts out there, like the vigil that I was able to listen to this morning. And so a third thing is that we can encourage people to sign up for the newsletter and to follow you in all the places, which I'll include in the show notes.
That's important.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I always close every episode with an opportunity to share any acknowledgments or insights that came from the conversation. So I'll share something first and then invite you each to share any final thought. I'm deeply moved by the power of connection at the end of the day in a problem that seems so complex and without a solution. Hearing you both share your stories and talking about the work that you're doing does bring me hope and makes me feel like we need to strip everything down to the most simple thing, which is literally listening to one another. And I hope that this conversation reaches far and wide and many people open their hearts and their minds to your stories and the incredible work that you're doing, and that we all choose to support you. What final thoughts or insights are coming up for you?
I think, in many ways, what you said is what Desmond Tutu always said. And the word in it is Ubuntu, meaning that our lives are so intertwined. And really, whatever will happen to you will affect me and vice versa. So if we bear that in mind, perhaps everybody can be a part of change.
Thank you.
I think that there's nothing we should fight for, why we will fight for, and why we will end our life and other people's lives. Nothing matter. So we should live this life as God wants us to do, to live in peace and to make it much better for everyone. Thank you.
Is there anything that either of you feel like I didn't ask that I should or that feels unspoken?
Maybe the last thing that I could say that I learned something when I was at the college that if you're afraid, don't do anything. And if you do it or say it, don't be afraid. So I'm not afraid to be a peace activist. Whatever happened around me, whatever any person have thought against me, or even if we have another war, we are not afraid to continue our mission and our message of peace and reconciliation.
Thank you so much for listening to this special episode of the Mother's Quest podcast. My hope is that the impact of this conversation extends far and wide, and your listening is just the beginning. Please check the show notes to follow up on all the ways you could get involved with Robbie, Lila, and the Parent Circle. I especially hope you'll consider joining us and making a financial contribution to reach our $10,000 goal to help the mothers of the Parent Circle come together. At time of recording, we are halfway to that goal. Before we close, I invite you to listen with an undefended, open heart to Mother's Quest member and poet Jenna Schwartz with this episode's dedication and a final invitation to contribute. Here's Jenna.
Hello, I'm Jenna Schwartz, and I'm honored and humbled to dedicate this episode of the Mother's Quest podcast to all of the members of the Parent Circle who are working for peace in Israel and Palestine. I'd like to share a poem I wrote recently called The Undefended Heart. After the points made and the points taken, and the points given and the points traded, after the perspectives shared and the perspectives altered, and the perspectives inverted and the perspectives perpetuated, after the arguments for and the arguments against, after the hashing out and the boiling down, and the bubbling up of tears that emotion and fact must be severed limb to limb, and the grief of land that can't translate its own memories into something like peaceful coexistence, after the lack of nuance and the belabored debates, after the oppressor and the oppressed, after the victim and the villain, after the sirens and the rockets, after the provocations and the tear gas, after the abandoned and the brutalized, after the fleeing and the forsaking and the fences and the funerals, after the infographics and the memes, after the centuries of family drama, after nothing is left but rubble and racing nervous systems, what is left, my brother? What is left, my sister? There is no pride, no victory, no winner, no peace, only this, the undefended heart gleaming in my chest, inside of which you'll find the desert, the valley, the wadi, the wall, the mosque, the temple, the sea, the cry of my people, and the cry of your people, the grief, the longing, the recognition of me in you, and of you in me, inconvenient though this may be for those who would have us remain enemies. The children, the grandmothers and the grandfathers who carry ancestral memory in our veins, speak now through these chambers, praying to God, to Hashem, to Allah, to the memory of those before, and to all of the afters after the fighting has ceased, for peace. On behalf of the Mother's Quest community, I am honored to contribute the first $108, matched by other Mother's Quest members of diverse faiths and backgrounds who all believe in the power of mothers to take on the most profound challenges we face. May we continue to seek peace.